2019, I think, is going to be a very important year for our field, for communities all across the country. And we're organizing people in all the states where we're active to contact their local elected figures, to talk with their constituents about the importance of the work that they're doing, and to work on the relationships that they've got with their federal representatives in both the House and the Senate. Unfortunately, we have to deal with folks that are not elected to make decisions about the lives of our communities every day. But I think if we truly embrace the idea that every voice is important, that we need to be able to hear the diversity of voices in our communities, to understand the richness of the story of the lives that people lead, we need to be active to protect those voices. Unfortunately, in today's world, there's a lot of media everywhere, and not much of it is meaningful.
David, we'll be speaking about very soon.
Right. I mean, I talk about it as I think about like the scene from The Life of Pi. You're in the boat in the middle of the ocean. You're surrounded by water, and there's not a single drop you can drink that can sustain you. Right. That's the situation that all of our communities are in. And it's a situation that we can only reverse if we make sure that we sustain institutions that care about the lives of our communities. And the thing that I tell everybody is that media does not care about your community. Right? And increasingly we're looking at not just national but transnational media products that can make money over decades through their use of their intellectual property, right? And that's very different from talking about what you need here in Alliance on a day-to-day basis, or what you need in any community in Ohio on a day-to-day basis, or how you need to understand what's going on with your local government, or what's going on with the local school district, or even just what's happening with your local neighbor. So we'll put this to really good use, Alicia. Thank you so much, Central States. And know that even though I'm 4+ hours away in DC, I'm just a phone call away. So we'll be working in partnership here in the coming days and weeks. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Thank you for all the work you do for us.
Yeah. Thank you. Mm-hmm. This is really, really a surprise. Thank you very much.
Yay!
Thank you, everybody.
I will invite Chip back up.
All right, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, David Phillippi. David is currently the Sales and Marketing Director for the PPS Group and member of the McDowell Society of Artists in Cincinnati. David's experience includes credits for Assistant Director of multiple feature films, including the Oscar-nominated Seabiscuit, as well as stage appearances as a professional magician with legends such as David Copperfield and Penn and Teller. David Phillippi.
Thank you. Welcome to Alliance. This is my hometown. I don't know if you guys knew that. But 40 years ago, I started here in the Career Tech program. So today I was asked to kind of share my journey from Alliance and also kind of some thoughts on successful traits and habits. And then finally, I have some thoughts on how access can remain viable and some things to focus on moving forward. So I appreciate you guys being here for my presentation today. And hopefully this will work. All right. So Alliance is a pretty small town. I don't know if you've had a chance to get around. One of the great things when I was a kid is that the church that I attended shared the same parking lot with the movie theater. So when church got out at noon, my parents would have me scurry across the parking lot by myself, and I would go to the movies. And I would see the noon show, and then they wouldn't come back and get me till 4 o'clock, so I would watch the same show twice. And I loved going to the movies as a kid. Saw a lot of the classic movies here in Alliance. I found myself, though, when I was watching the second film, I started paying attention to things that you wouldn't normally pick up the first time. So I started watching background action, sets, and design, and art direction. And I also enjoyed knowing what was going to happen before the audience. So I also liked to look around because I knew the punchline was coming or something was going to happen big on screen. So we grew up, loved movies. It was a big event to go to the movies growing up. Here back in the 60s and 70s. Don't know if you know this, but Alliance, Ohio has a very famous person that attended grade school here named Charlton Heston. He was here for a few years, but that also was a little inspiration that in the back of my mind somewhere was, hey, could somebody from Alliance or a small town work in television someday, maybe work in media somehow? So thinking of Charlton was just one more thing I was thinking about growing up. I was not a good student. There may be some other non-good students in the audience. And after my sophomore year, I had a 1.7 GPA here. You know, in the back of the yearbook, when it lists all your accomplishments, it was just like my name. You know, so. But it's important because that really was a big moment in my life where the counselor called me in and said, hey, you're not college material. Brutally honest. And she said, you know, you should look at some of our vocational programs. Well, back when I went to school, vocational education had a real stigma to it. And one of the programs that she mentioned to me was what we called telecommunications. And at that time, it was primarily television, radio, and they were doing access work, a few hours a week access in the 70s here. So that was the program, and I had a real interest for that. So a couple other notes. It really was used to determine white-collar and blue-collar careers, and a lot of it was based on race and economic status at that time. So there was, you know, a system for moving people through school who were poor performing. And I was in that. So I applied for the program here, and I was rejected based on my GPA because they would only take 10 students, and it was for 5 hours a day for 2 years. And they were pulling from 4 different high schools. So Alliance got 4 of the 10 slots. And as a 1.7 GPA, I just didn't qualify. My mother had been substitute teaching here. She actually came into the school over the summer and said, hey, can my son get in? Is there any way you can add a slot? And they're like, no. And on that car ride home, I saw my mother cry in the car. And she said, that was your chance. And that was really the wake-up moment for me of, wow, education is really important. Even though I was bored in traditional studies, she's like, you've dreamt about doing something, you know, but you can see, you know, your lack of hard work for the first, 10 years of education is really going to cost you. A week before school started, literally a week before school started, Alliance High School called and said, hey, one of the kids dropped the program. Would you be interested? So in fall of 1978, that's me with the mustache, I entered this program. Yeah. 40 years ago, right now, I entered that program. And the teacher came to me on the first day and said, don't be a distraction in my class. You don't deserve to be in here. Very difficult. Over the course of the 2 years I worked with him, he said, I'm going to be harder on you than anybody. And over the course of the 2 years, it's a great program. We cycled all the positions. Production, I was working in 2-inch editing, 1-inch editing, 3/4. So starting at 15 years old, I was doing this work. So at the end of 2 years, I really loved to be an editor, and the instructor came to me and said, there is somebody out there right now in this world waiting for you to come and take their job. And I thought, wow. And that was also a moment where somebody at an educational level believed in me, for the first time, that you could do something. It's more than a class. This could be a career. And so that was a moment. And he also said, I know you love editing, but would you ever consider directing? You're editing other people's ideas. Would you want to have your own ideas? So that kind of put me on the thought of maybe directing would be a path. So literally 2 months before I graduated, no one in my family attended college, and none of my siblings. and I wasn't thinking college because my GPA was still poor. Even though I was excelling in telecommunications and bringing up my other grades, it was still poor. And I was thinking, hey, I've got a degree from a state certificate in vocational education from Alliance. I can go out and get a job in the world working at a TV station. That was my dream. And a buddy who you'll meet tonight, who's emceeing the awards, Scott Robertson, grabbed me and said, hey, you need to go to college. You need to get some training. 2-year school, go into the military, get additional education. You constantly have to be learning. So I applied to the only 2-year radio and television program in the state of Ohio, which was Ohio University in Zanesville, Ohio. And I thought, maybe I can get through a 2-year program. That was kind of my thoughts. And they accepted me, but under academic probation. And they said, you have to maintain a 3.3 GPA, or we're tossing you out. OU is a very tough school. It's got a great national reputation. And so I ended up making Dean's List and had never pulled more than a 2.0 in my life. So, but there are moments in our lives that are important. So it's understanding those and capitalizing. At the school, we had some pretty poor equipment, but I will tell you, like Access, we don't have, the Access world, we don't have the best equipment, but guess what? We come up with solutions. We don't fix it in post. We create it in camera. We know good lighting. We know good audio. We know good direction. We know good storytelling. So in a way, I was happy I didn't have the best equipment because I think I learned more, and it meant a lot more. That's the only photo I could find that I would be willing to show you from my time there. But yeah, for the young people, those are records. I don't know if you knew that. And
I know what records are.
I know. So worked at the local Zanesville radio station, and I went to reached out to the head of the department and said, hey, I'd love to actually earn some income here while I'm going to school. And so he introduced me to Zanesville Cable Entertainment of Ohio, which was local access. And so I was the cameraman for all the city council meetings. And Miss Southeastern Ohio beauty pageants. So I was working the good stuff. And but a great experience, and continued on to Athens. And things got interesting when I went down to Athens to complete a Bachelor of Science degree. My senior year of college, I read in the little OU bulletin that Hollywood was coming to Nelsonville, Ohio, which is right outside of Athens. And they were going to make a feature film, and they wanted extras for really one big day. They were going to do a big shoot, and they just needed a bunch of college kids to show up. It was a movie about the 1950s. It was called, when we were filming, it was called Heart and Soul, but it ended up being called Mischief. They changed the name right before they rolled it out. That's Kelly Preston, by the way, who's married to John Travolta, and there were some other stars that were young and up and coming, and this would have been 1984. And I did what, I don't know what caused me to do this, but I read this in the paper and literally went up to my dorm room, and we used to have telephones in the dorm room, and I picked up the phone and I called 20th Century Fox. And they listed the name of the producer in the article, and I called and asked for him. And I convinced his secretary to put me through, and he talked to me for 40 minutes. Sam was famous for producing a TV show called Route 66, a lot of other TV shows. Sam told me a story that when he came out of the Navy, in San Diego, he picked up a newspaper in the 40s, and there was an ad in there that said, "Who wants to learn the film industry? I will teach one person." And Sam applied to that job when he was a kid. And the person that trained him, and he got to live in his house, was a guy named Louis Mayer, the head of MGM Studios. So Sam liked that I had the guts to call him. And he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, well, he asked me 2 questions. He said, "Are you a member of the Directors Guild of America?" Because I said, "Can I do something with directing?" I really didn't know how it worked. And he's like, "Well, do you know what the Directors Guild of America is?" I said, "I've never heard of that." He's like, "Well, you got to be in that if you want to kind of work in Hollywood films. It's union." And he was kind of explaining it to me. And he said, "But maybe you can come out as an extra." He said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Alliance, Ohio." And he said, "My wife's family is from Alliance, Ohio." So you may say that's a really crazy coincidence, but if you don't ask the questions, if you don't go for it in life, you don't know all the connections that are out there for you guys. So we did the film, and here I am with Sam. And not only did I stay one day, but I stayed 2.5 months. And eventually they made me the stand-in for this actor, D.W. Brown. I pulled a clip off the movie. I'm in about 30 scenes of the movie. I don't like being in movies, but I prefer life behind the camera. But have remained friends with a lot of these people. But as a stand-in, and basically you're rehearsing the scenes, you get to see how the crew works. And I fell in love with what the second assistant director does on a movie. And the second assistant director does all the paperwork, they do all the planning, all the crew calls, all the coordination, but they also direct all the background action. They direct the extras. They direct real people who are less a pain in the rear end than Hollywood stars. And I love that because they were directing me and they were telling me where to stand and what to do. So even though I was in front of the camera, I really was focused on relationships behind the camera. So I went to all my professors at OU and said, hey, I want to do this movie, and they all let me test out early at Ohio University. So I was there every day for about 2.5 months, and I found myself the summer of '84 now saying, what do I do? So I tried to find the worst map I could online, and this is it. But basically, I kind of started here in Zanesville, and I kind of went everywhere and applied for a job in television because I thought my road to Hollywood is going to be through television. Get some television experience, and maybe I can work into Hollywood. And pretty much, I got about 25 no's. No, no, no. You don't have experience. I'm like, well, how can I experience if I can't get a job? And it's one of those things that you guys have all dealt with. So ended up going to Columbus, Ohio. And this is embarrassing to say, especially since this is being streamed and not edited. But one of the stations there, the ABC affiliate, I had called every station in Ohio. And the ABC affiliate, which is now WSYX, they would put me on hold. And this is back in the days where you actually had to pay for a phone call. And so they would disconnect me, and they would connect me to the wrong person. And I was saying, I don't know what's going on at this station, but I need to go into this station. So I showed up one day, and I actually had an interview later in the day, but I'm there with my little 3/4-inch demo reel and my little resume. And I walk in at 9 a.m., and I say, I'm here to see the production manager. And all I really wanted to get was an answer on the phone, because driving from Alliance, Ohio to Columbus is a couple hours out of my life that I didn't need to make. But I drove down there, I walked in the lobby and said, I want to meet with the production manager. And they're like, well, he'll only meet with you if you have a meeting scheduled. Do you have a meeting scheduled? And I said, yeah, I do. Which was a total lie. But I thought, they're so disorganized that they might actually think I do have a meeting. Please edit that. So she called back. The front desk was very nice. They called back, and he said, oh, I'm really sorry, I forgot about the meeting. He said, I'm going to be in meetings for like 3 or 4 hours. Can we reschedule? And I said, no, that's fine. I'll wait. So I sat down on the couch in the lobby, and I was willing to wait 4 hours. And I could look over at the receptionist, and after about 20 minutes, I saw her say something like, he's still here. Like he won't go away. So he met with me, and I wanted to get into the production department so bad at a TV station. And guys, you have to remember, for the younger people, there was only like 4 or 5 TV stations in a market. Getting a job in a major market like Columbus, Ohio was very difficult. Right out of college, I was 21 years old. And the guy takes me, he interviews me. At the end of the interview, he says, we don't have any job openings, but I'm going to hire you because I've never met anybody more passionate than you to want to work in television. So I was there for 9 years. I will tell you, though, 2 weeks in, they started me off as floor director. And 2 weeks in, he said, hey, I need to see you in my office. And our station was owned by Taft Broadcasting, and it's a big corporation at the time. They were the largest TV group in the United States, first to own 13 stations, big leader in the United States as far as broadcasting. And the guy called me in 2 weeks later and said, hey, and I thought, he's going to tell me he hired and he wasn't allowed to hire somebody because there was no budget for it, and he had to let me go. And he said, hey, we've let the morning news director go. You're going to be directing the morning news starting next week. So I was 21 years old directing the morning news in Columbus, Ohio. So pretty good. And then I would stay a few more years, and I replaced him and became the production manager of the station and was over all the directors and did that and directed the Earl Bruce Show, Ohio State basketball, and every newscast, promotion, parades. I did it all. Went over to Dayton, Ohio. I know there's some Dayton people here, several Dayton people here. I worked at NBC. I computerized the newsroom at the NBC station in Dayton. And, but I had not forgotten about my dream about working in Hollywood. And so I contacted the Ohio Film Commission in Columbus. And I said, hey, I want to get to Hollywood. How do I get into the DGA? Can you help me? I was actually talking to the executive director, and she said, David, it's 1987. There's a Hollywood director's strike. There's writer's strike. No one is getting put into the DGA, and there's no one who lives in Ohio in the DGA. You've got a great job at the TV station. You should just do that. Well, I don't, again, take no a lot. So a year later, I got all my resources and references and samples and demos, and I applied to the DGA and was admitted in 1988. And I've been a member of the Directors Guild of America for 30 years as an assistant director. A few years later, because I started a family in Cincinnati, I would turn down some projects, but the first movie I worked on, I just want to put it up here, you probably have never seen it, was a baseball movie called Summer Catch. And worked with Jessica Biel, who's married to Justin Timberlake, you know her, Freddie Prinze Jr., Wilmer Valderrama, and got to assistant direct, and that was awesome. And there was, again, that was a moment where all my life I was waiting for the call. I finally got the call, and it's that moment of, am I still ready to do it, you know? Because I was fired up and my career changed, but that was my dream. So I was like, I can't pass on that. So did that film. And then the film that was referenced earlier, Seabiscuit, being the assistant director, another amazing experience. Some of the stats on it. One of the interesting things, I mean, that's a large budget to deal with. I did all the work in Lexington, Kentucky, and we invented a lot of really interesting techniques for the film. We used, they're called exercisers, basically robotic horses for a lot of the close-ups. We came up with some interesting camera car rigging. We actually won some technical awards for the rigging we did on the camera. These are what I would put together. So you might have a little call sheet, you know, for production, and ours were pages and pages, and the crew lasts hundreds, you know, hundreds of people. And if it's raining, if it's, you know, you would have to have like 6 options based on weather every day, and so it was a lot to organize. And, you know, the way they got me in originally was Summer Catch was a baseball movie, so they knew I directed a lot of big crowd scenes and extras. And they're like, yeah, there was going to be one day like with 5,000 extras. Are you okay with that? And I'm like, And so again, I'm like, yes, I can do that. And I'm thinking, why did I say yes to that? For the last 22 years, I've been fortunate to work at PPS. We're out of Cincinnati. We just recently moved over to Covington about a decade ago. We do high-end regional, national commercial work, mostly with ad agencies. And I do client services. When there is a commercial that is union, I might also assistant direct some of those. So I'm pretty fortunate to have an employer that even though I'm on the client side, they allow me to continue to do creative work. So that's really nice. So a couple things, I know you have another session coming up. So for me, these are my keys to success, and I really think for our industry, is passion and attitude and grit. So, I mean, there are many, I think all of you have probably a similar story in some ways of, you know, you have to love what you do, right? So there's a reason we're all sitting here. There's a reason we're doing what we do. Production, historically, is not a high-paying field, you know, but people are like, you look young for doing this for like 30 years. I'm like, because I'm happy, you know? I mean, that's really the reason. And, you know, the other thing I would recommend is always continue learning. Always try to be the expert in the room. So always acquire knowledge. I learn something new. I try it pretty much every day. And then the third thing, networking relationships. And for you young people, Alliance Aviators and all people, when you go off to college or when you go on for additional education, get as many internships and co-ops as you can. The biggest mistake, and I do a lot of speaking at colleges, the biggest mistake is students who come out, and I don't care if you're a 4.0 or what your GPA is, they don't have any experience, and they think the day they graduate they're going to walk in somewhere, and they're not. You know, I would rather have a student who's a 2.0 that had 5 co-ops. than somebody who's a 4.0 and hasn't taken the time, because that shows me you're not passionate, right? So I want to invest my time into people who, want to be doing this. This is kind of a fun, complex little puzzle, but basically I was trying to show all the things that kind of go into access and the access world and all the things that you guys do so well. So I wanted to close out by just talking about how to stay relevant, whether it's access or really for anyone. But the first is get digitally trained. I came in through broadcasting. And so my degree in 1984 didn't mean a lot today. So in 2005, I went back to college, went back to OU, and got another degree in electronic media. Because my clients expect me, when I'm talking to ad agencies and they're going to spend $400,000 on a commercial, and they say, what's the best way to do something? What's the best resources? They expect me to know. So, and a lot of my clients are younger than I am, so I need to be up on it. The other thing I would say for you guys is serve the digital consumers first, and you may already know this, you may already be thinking this. But we were geared to serve the broadcast consumers. And then when the internet came around, it was kind of like, well, they're kind of a second thought. Let's worry about the broadcast, and I think it's flipped. I've got a 23-year-old son, he doesn't own a television. He may never buy a TV. I mean, he's just not, and he's not into he's not into the broadcast world. And then multi-platforms. So seeking out as many platforms as you guys can and getting on social media is so important. The audience is no longer ruled by the clock. When I started off in television, it was very competitive between stations. It's all on-demand programming now. And the biggest secret, which many of you already know, and it's been true forever, is that content is the most important thing. For you guys, continue to be hyper-local. Get as involved in your community as you can. It creates value. And what is your brand? Is it Veterans Affairs? Is it public affairs? What are the keys? What do you see in your community? What is your brand? Be consistent with your brand. And honestly, if a viewer depends on you and you deliver a successful message time and time again, you're not going to be replaced. It's the people that are constantly searching and changing their brand and identity. That's confusing to viewers. They want something they can count on. The biggest thing, and somebody mentioned trust earlier with media. I don't know where he's sitting. Somebody said media trust, but there isn't a lot of trust. So I think that's the big takeaway is that, there's no trust with media. And if your brand, I think access and the community work, I think is so wonderful that, that's a gap that you can fill, is the trust. And so kind of wanted to wrap up a couple of things just that maybe you'll find interesting. So today, career tech has never been stronger. Compared to where I was in vocational 40 years ago, where it's like, you're not going to be successful, so we're going to throw you in vocation. That's kind of what that was about. They were kind of just focusing people. It's like, well, you're not the right college fit. And today, it's never been stronger. Here's a couple stats that I really like. So in 2015, 69% of all high school students went to college. But in that, only 40%, and that's a standard number that's been going on for years, not just in 2015, only 40% of college students, or 40% never complete their degree. So you have 69% of the kids going, but only 40% of the 69% actually complete their degree. Average student debt in 2015 was $30,000. That's average. And of the students that did graduate, only 25 to 40% are actually employed in positions that required a degree. So they invested so much money and time and ended up in positions that you didn't need a degree. So, it just shows how important career tech is. So a few years ago, just kind of wrapping up my personal story, the theater that I love so much, Mount Union, was taken down by the college. But they did something super great for me. In the early 2000s, they did a special screening of Seabiscuit. Jokes me up to talk about it, but to be able to come back and see the film in my own hometown theater was pretty awesome. And they let me do a little speaking afterwards, which was great. Charlton Heston, who I'd always looked up to, later in life, I connected with him. And we corresponded. And I wanted to let him know how proud Alliance was of him. And he gave me some great advice. I ended up doing the social media page for Mischief, but secretly it's called Heart and Soul because no one knew that was the original name of the film. So I'm friends with a lot of the actors and actresses, and we still get together all those years ago to reconnect. And the Ohio Film Commission, that at the time wasn't very friendly to a young person looking to get in the DGA, in 2009 they asked me to be on a board to figure out how to bring film production back to Ohio. So I was part of the governor's task force. It was about a dozen people who came up with a tax credit for the state of Ohio. So now you see all the film production coming in. Fun thing, and I wanted to throw this in here, was that my son, who's not really big on my industry, he's a business guy and a smart guy, I got to take him to the DGA Awards this year in February, so he got to walk on the red carpet. And he's like, maybe it's pretty cool after all, Dad, what you do. And the high school that was tough on me, I always come back, thanks to Kyle and Alliance High School, they actually brought me back into Alliance and recognized me and put me in their Hall of Fame. So I will close with this graphic because I just saw the documentary, and I do think we need a little bit more Mr. Rogers in this world. And I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you guys so much for having me.